Russia wants to set up the Soviet Negro Republic. Louis Farrakhan wants to set up the Nation of Islam. Russia wants to install a communist dictatorship. Louis Farrakhan wants to install an Islamic dictatorship. Russia, black nationalist separatist rhetoric. Louis Farrakhan, black nationalist separatist rhetoric. Russia, a class war is coming to the streets of America. Louis Farrakhan, a race war is coming to the streets of America. Russia, socialism is a necessary step towards our goal. Louis Farrakhan, socialism is a necessary step towards our goal. This author feels the need to issue the reader this severe warning to all of my black American readers. The white Marxist liberal organizers of Eastern Europe may have succeeded in convincing the people to overthrow Cuba, but this does not mean that they are finished with trying to propagandize and organize black America. Even in 2025, you are not safe from these bastards. Even as I sit here at the computer right now, somewhere a white Marxist liberal is attempting to propagandize a black American man, woman, or child into adopting 20th century European-style revolutionary thinking. It's happening to entire neighborhoods and communities, even to the point of training a black orator to speak the 20th century white European-style revolutionary thinking to the black community, even to the point of influencing pastors in historically black denominations of Christianity to preach their political and economic agenda to the people in the pews as though it's from the Bible itself. When you hear the language of 20th century European-style revolution, even when it's coming out of the mouth of somebody who looks like you, beware. Look past the speaker, and you will find a white Marxist liberal paymaster who has arranged and paid the cash necessary to put them in front of you on whatever platform they're coming to you on. TV, your favorite internet podcast, wherever. That is not an accident. You have been targeted on purpose. 100 years later, they're still trying to recruit you to the front line and participate in an overthrow of the only government and the only economic system, our imperfections in executing aside, in which you and your family have a chance to succeed. They do not care about you. You are a pawn in their globalist political chess game. They would kill you and those you love in a second if it would advance their goals. They want you to feel happy to be sacrificed in a larger war that you may not even fully be aware that is going on. The fake community activists that they have financed and caused to become famous to you actually works for and with the white liberal. In today's terms, this person is called a quote-unquote community organizer. But in the classic communist writings, that same person was once called a quote-unquote red agitator. 20th century Eastern communist terminology, red agitator. 21st century Western communist terminology, community organizer. 20th century Eastern communist terminology, the Bolsheviks versus the Mensheviks. 21st century Western communist terminology, the 99% versus the 1%. Whether it is called a red agitator or a community organizer, these are synonymous terms. Whether the battle is said to be the Bolsheviks versus the Mensheviks or the 99% versus the 1%, just remember that it's two different ways of referring to the same thing. Different shell, but same nut. The name has changed, but the game remains the same. The only thing different is the geographical setting and the date on the calendar. As Solomon once wrote, there is nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. There, the community organizers' paid function is to make speeches in front of crowds at protests, calling out to the proletariat in the language of the revolution. It is their goal to escalate the protest into a riot, with the ultimate end game being the fostering of a violent Marxist revolution right there, wherever they're speaking. They need chaos, they need instability, they need crisis, they need destruction. In the 21st century, though, the game has slightly changed. China has risen to world power status. And they're now also heavily involved in attempting to recruit black American men, women, and children into 20th century Soviet-style communist mentality. When they are not flooding the black community with cheap and easily accessible marijuana, fentanyl, and heroin, they're trying to bring about the revolution. But one of the key components of Chinese communism, a la Mao Zedong, is quote-unquote cultural revolution. It means training the kids to hate the history, heritage, and culture of their home country so passionately that they cannot wait to replace it with new and less quote-unquote oppressive history, heritage, and culture. It involves the burning of flags, the banning of books, putting propaganda on TV and in movies, capturing the media, and the toppling of statues. 1996 China, Red August. 2020 America, Summer of Love. 1996 China, topple statues of national heroes like Confucius. 2020 America, topple statues of national heroes like George Washington. 1966 China, rewrite the history of China. Pretend the good never happened. Let the bad define the nation. 2020 America, rewrite the history of America. Pretend the good never happened. Let the bad define the nomination. 1966 China, campaign to suppress counter-revolutionaries. 2020 America, campaign to cancel critics of the revolution. 1966 China, anybody who does not comply with this movement, call them a fascist. 2020 America, anyone who does not comply with this movement, call them a racist or a misogynist. 1966 China, train the kids to reject and hate all that their great-grandparents built and loved. 2020 America, train the kids to reject and hate all that their great-grandparents built and loved. 1966 China, fundamentally transform China. 2020 America, fundamentally transform America. On the street and in the community, you are the target, not just of the professional agitator, but of larger and darker, sinister, unseen forces behind the scenes, which have trained and funded the agitator. Their thinking is that if you're willing to turn your back on your country culturally, then turning your back on it politically and economically are logical next steps in the effort to Sovietize your mind and heart, to convince you to become their expendable tool in a revolution here. They will train you to hate all that you've grown up looking at, participating in, loving, and learning about culturally in the United States. They will call it all, quote-unquote, oppressive, and they will encourage you to, quote-unquote, liberate yourself from it, usually by slandering, burning, or destroying any vestige of it. When you hear the sales pitch trying to motivate you to do that, do not forget the words of this book. This has been their exact method of operation, modus operandi, on every continent for nearly 2 centuries. And they've been using, for the most part, the same terminology the whole time. Examples being revolution, oppression, liberation, equality, social change, self-determination, etc. They think you're stupid. They think you're ignorant of history. They think that you're evil. They think that you will be easily gotten onto their side. Recognize the game when you see it and hear it. Don't fall for it. The intent of this part of this chapter was meant to be an examination of, reaction to, and interpretation of the international Muslim community's fatwa against Farrakhanism, going down a rabbit hole of research into an anti-communist rant is outside of the scope of what I was setting out to do, but it ended up going that way. After further review, I'm going to leave it in the final product because it is good stuff, and in a way, related to the topic at hand. The point that I was seeking to make with all of that, and I confess I took the scenic route in order to get to this point, is that Louis Farrakhan is not the author, originator, or inventor of the vision or concept of a united black nationalist separatist movement in the United States that is meant to result in a revolution or uprising and the creation of an independent, sovereign, autonomous, black-populated and black-run nation state. It was thought up by white European Marxist thinkers who were on the scene before Farrakhan, before Elijah Muhammad, and even before Wallace Fard, in order to propagate the end goal of the quote-unquote religion of the black man, They had to borrow pre-existing ideas from white European thinkers that published them first. You have to be able to see the huge problems with that. Any religious teaching that was revealed by Islam's Allah deity and came down from Islam's heaven has to be a teaching that humankind did not know beforehand and could never arrive at, independent of Allah's miraculous intervention into time and space and supernatural communication of that teaching. The Islamic definition of the creator of the universe would not reveal something that is already here, that was human in origin. Farrakhan's desire to create a nation within a nation and then break away to become its own nation was already here before he or his predecessors ever communicated it. And there is strong evidence that Farrakhan and his predecessors actually borrowed heavily from it. Preaching political and economic ideas authored by white men in Europe who you proclaim to be the devil incarnate because they've colonized and imperialistically burned everything to the ground across the planet as the supreme wisdom from Allah and the final solution to all of the issues facing black Americans is beyond silly. As seen in the fatwa, it must be noted and taken into serious consideration that Farrakhan's religious message has been looked at by the top Muslim scholars that Mecca, Medina, Cairo, and all over the world. And when compared against the Quran and the Hadith, it has been publicly condemned on a world stage as being anti-Islamic. Are you a member of the Nation of Islam? Are you a follower of Louis Farrakhan? If so, it's critically important to your soul that you pay close attention to the next point that I'm about to make over the next few pages. Serious as a heart attack. Follow me. Take it in. Read it twice if you have to, but do not miss it. In describing Louis Farrakhan and his movement, the ulema quote a passage from the Quran that in its context is talking about Muslims who claim to be Muslims, but in actuality are fake Muslims. Quote, there are some people who say we believe in Allah and in the last day, but they are not believers. They attempt to deceive Allah and their fellow Muslims, but they only deceive themselves, and they're not even aware. In their hearts is a sickness, and Allah has increased their sickness, and there awaits them a painful chastisement because of the fact that they have spoken lies. Surah Al-Baqarah, the cow, that is Surah 2, verses 8 through 10. So here's this author's breakdown of this passage. There are some people who say we believe in Allah and the last day. There are men, women, and children in the world who verbally claim to be Muslims or believers in the core teaching of Islam, but they are not believers. Inside of their mind and heart, they actually reject the core teachings of Islam. In what they believe and how they live, they have defined themselves as being outside of the community of Muslims. They attempt to deceive Allah. An all-knowing definition or concept of God cannot be tricked, and any attempt to do so is extremely stupid and hopeless. And their fellow Muslims, their fellow members of the Muslim community are not stupid, and they're not fooled. They're watching your conduct, they're hearing your words. Your life and words are in direct conflict with the belief system defined and documented as being viewed as commands of Islam's Allah in both the Quran and the Hadith. But they only deceive themselves. The Quran says A, but you choose to believe and live B. The Hadith says X, but you choose to believe and live Y. You are not fooling Allah. You are not fooling the leaders at the mosque. You are not fooling other Muslims in your circle. But if you can believe, think, live, and practice opposite of what and how the primary sources instruct you to, yet still look into the mirror and somehow convince yourself that what you see staring back at you is a genuine Muslim, then maybe you can fool yourself. But that is the only one who's buying your act, because nobody else is. And they're not even aware. You are a fake Muslim by every unit of measurement, on every hand, according to every piece of evidence. But you are the only one in the room that does not know that you are a fraud. You think that you're the real deal. Self-delusion is the most powerful kind of delusion. There are non-Muslims who think that they are Muslims and thus not cognizant of their unbelieving condition at all. In their hearts is a sickness. In a Muslim piece of literature, a person who is a non-believer in Islam's core teachings is viewed as having an internal spiritual sickness, and Allah has increased their sickness. If a professing but not possessing Muslim remains hard-hearted towards the actual core teachings of Islam for too long without repenting, the Allah deity of Islam will punish that person by hardening their heart even more against the Quran and the Hadith than it already is, thus pushing the fake Muslim deeper into the pit of unbelief than they already were, and sending them at 500 miles an hour in the direction of hell. And there awaits them a painful chastisement. At the end of the road, a rejecter of Islam, even one who thinks he's a Muslim, but is literally unaware of the fact that he's not, is going to be punished for the sin of rejecting Allah, Muhammad, the Quran, and the Hadith, but also for the sin of lying in public by claiming that you accept and believe in those things when you really don't, because of the fact that they have spoken lies. In Islam, saying that you are a believer in Islam and a faithfully practicing Muslim when you're actually not is viewed as a huge sin. It is a deliberate attempt to fool your family, friends, neighbors, co-workers, schoolmates, and everybody that you meet, to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, even an attempt to pull the wool over Allah's eyes himself. It does not go well for a spiritual fraud in Islam. As you know, this author is not a believer in, but is actually a rejecter of Islam. This author is a Christian, but is highly trained in Islam and on that basis extremely qualified and competent to expound upon Islamic literature. Above is a condensed but stunningly accurate exposition on what the Quranic passage is seeking to communicate to people who believe in, love, and study that book. To assure you that this Christian author's breakdown of this falls in line with Islamic scholarship from within the Muslim world itself by people who actually respect and believe in the Quran, let's look at how some of the most authoritative and respected Muslim commentators in the field view the passage that I just taught you from. Of Surah 2, verse 8, Nuruddin says, quote, after mentioning two classes of people, the believers and rejectors of the revelation, the Holy Quran now comes to a third class of people, the hypocrites. Hypocrites are those who profess to be believers, but who are disbelievers at heart and in deeds, lacking the strength of faith necessary for complete obedience, close quote. That's Exegesis of the Holy Quran, Commentary and Reflections by Allama Nuruddin, page 324. Of Surah 2, verse 18, Nasir says, quote, those in this verse are the hypocrites, referring originally to a group of people in and around Medina who pretended to be Muslims, but at times collaborated with the disbelievers, or who were lukewarm in their faith to the point of inaction. But it also refers to such people in general, wherever and whenever they might live, close quote. That's the Study Quran, a new translation and commentary by Saeed Hossein Nasir, page 16. Of Surah 2:9, Nuruddin says, quote, it also means he desired to deceive, but did not succeed in his attempt to deceive. The verse would mean that the hypocrites desired to deceive Allah and the believers, but did not succeed in this attempt. The verses that follow describe further the state of the hypocrites, close quote. That is Exegesis of the Holy Quran, Commentary and Reflections by Allama Nuruddin, page 325. Of Surah 2:9, Nasir calls the behavior described in the passage and, quote, attempt to deceive God, close quote, and goes on to continue, quote, the idea of God's plotting and scheming, overcoming the plotting and scheming of the disbelievers and hypocrites, appears in several places in the Quran, close quote. That is the Study Quran, a new translation and commentary by Saeed Hossein Nasir, page 16. In his commentary above, Nasir is referring to an Islamic principle contained in Surah 3, verse 54, in which it is written, quote, Allah is the greatest of all deceivers. He is saying that the hypocrites can't outlie the greatest liar of all. They can't outscam the greatest scammer of all. They can't outtrick the greatest trickster of all. They can't outdeceive the greatest deceiver of all. A non-Muslim trying to pass themselves off as a Muslim and out-con the greatest con artist of all, trying to out-scheme the greatest schemer of all, is not going to make it. The Arabic word for deceivers that is used in Surah 354 is makra, M-A-K-A-R-A, makra, in which the Islamic scholarship of Princeton University defines as, quote, to plot or scheme, to devise or execute a plot or scheme against someone, close quote. That is Key Terms of the Quran, a critical dictionary by Nikolai Sinai, page 622. On the next page, the volume goes on to say that the word is, quote, said by the lexicographical tradition to signify recourse to ruse, guile, deceit, and artifice, close quote. That is Key Terms of the Quran, a critical dictionary by Nikolai Sinai, page 623. Again, that's Princeton University Press. It is quite an amazing challenge to attempt to process the fact that 5 times a day, 2.5 billion people across this planet drop to their knees to the point of putting their foreheads in the dirt on the ground in worship and servitude of a deity whose own holy writ, authored by sympathizers friendly to and believers in the religion, describes him as the greatest liar, deceiver, scammer, con artist, schemer, trickster, or plotter of them all. Being able to sneak up on a person and slit their throat unnoticed was quite the celebrated and admired skill to have in the 7th century Arabian desert, pagan, nomadic, tribal, savage war culture of Muhammad's time period. But a deity being described with this kind of deceptive attribute in his nature and essence is not an Abrahamic, Semitic, Jewish, or Christian definition or understanding of the Creator. This Allah thing is different. This is an evil pagan concept of deity. You've got to be able to see this. Elijah Muhammad once wrote a book called The Tricknology of the Devil. I testify that a sequel needs to be written entitled The Tricknology of Allah. In their internationally respected and very scholastically done Arabic to English translation of Islam's supposed second revelation or hadith, specifically that group of traditions originally compiled by Imam Abdul Muslim, the Dar as-Salam publishing house, who is the global leader in Islamic publishing, has a glossary of Islamic terms in the back of their 7th and final volume of Sahih al-Muslim. Al-Muslim has been declared Sahih historically by the most respected scholars in all of time throughout the Islamic world for many, many centuries. Arabic, Sahih, English, unimpeachably authentic. When you flip the pages to their rendering of this word, which has been translated in English as deceivers, the glossary defines the original Arabic word makra as signifying, quote, a secret strategy of which the victim has no inkling until the decisive blow was struck. Until then, The victim is under the illusion that everything is in good order. See Noble Quran, Al-Imran 354. Close quote. That is from the English translation of Sahih al-Muslim, compiled by Imam Abdul Hussein Muslim bin al-Hajjal, Volume 7, and it goes on, translated by Nasir Rudin al-Khatib, etc., from Maktaba Dar us Salam, which again is the global leader of Islamic publishing. So their glossary definition of the word even points to Surah 354 that I just quoted as the reference point if one wants to see a specific example of the word makra used in a sentence within the Quran. In that Quranic passage, Allah is using it of himself. This is a slight side observation, but I want you to take a moment to notice the evil and sinful adjectives that the authors of the Quran grab onto when attempting to describe the personality of Allah. Its wording comes close to one of Jesus' descriptions of Satan himself. Quote, "There is no truth in him. Whenever he tells a lie, he speaks in character because he is a liar and the father of lies." Close quote. That is John chapter 8, verse 44. Allah, the greatest of all deceivers, Surah 354. Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. We have just went down another slight rabbit hole, but this was made necessary due to Nasir breaking down the passage by citing Allah as being such a great deceiver that no fake Muslim could ever deceive him, because he's a better deceiver than they could possibly dream to be. He is several steps ahead of them always. He will see through their game. He will catch them every time. Because when someone lies to Allah, they are trying to beat him at his own game. And when you lie to the greatest liar that there is, he sends you to hell for even trying. This was Nasir's line of reasoning, and I had to put it into context for you, the reader, in the event that you did not have the background in Islam or Arabic to where his words would make sense to you. It was my job to break it down and, as we used to say, make it plain. Of Surah 2, verse 10, Nur ad-Din says, quote, "Hypocrisy is thus a disease of the heart, maradas, M-A-R-A-D-Z, which is Arabic for disease, refers to any cause of the loss of physical, moral, or spiritual health of a person, or any physical or moral weakness or defect in faith, or anything that hinders a human being's physical or moral progress. Moreover, if this disease is not cured in time, its effects become increasingly damaging and deleterious." Deleterious. Deleterious, perhaps? "The power of decision on the part of the hypocrites is weak. They lack trust and confidence and are consumed by jealousy and doubt. They are not trustworthy and are habitual liars. They try to compromise good with evil, which is really an act of weakness." The Arabic word also refers to the increased feelings of jealousy in their hearts. The rapid expansion of Islam escalated their jealousy, as it forced them to display increased outward accord with Muslims alongside inner discord. The words used for punishment of disbelievers is Abhab al-Azim, which means great punishment, whereas in the case of the hypocrites, it is Abhad Alim, woeful and grievous punishment, which is pain and anguish that cannot be seen by the eyes, but is felt in the heart. Thus, the qualities of punishments vary accordingly. This is because disbelievers express their disbelief and enmity openly, whereas hypocrites keep their feelings of hatred and malice hidden in their hearts. Close quote. This is the exegesis of the Holy Quran, commentary and reflections by Allama Nur ad-Din, pages 325 and 3 through 326 of Surah 210. Nasir says, quote, "The disease is usually understood to refer to doubt, hence a spiritual sickness, although some read having lied as having denied, which rebukes the hypocrite for lying and lends support to the former. Close quote. That is the Study Quran, a new translation and commentary by Saeed Hossein Nasir, page 16. Of Surah chapter 2, verses 8 through 10, Al-Ghazali says, quote, "We find that it describes the hypocrites, an indication of their wickedness and the threat they pose to the whole Muslim community," close quote. That is a thematic commentary on the Quran by Sheikh Muhammad al-Ghazali of the International Institute of Islamic Thought, page 8. If time and space permitted, I could show you examples by the hundreds of how the majority of international Islamic scholarship on every continent for the past 1,393 years has always interpreted and continues to interpret Surah 2, verses 8 through 10. And how my own breakdown of it does not need to take a back seat to anybody's, because it is on point and in line with the majority of Islamic thought. But I think you can see enough just in these few fine examples. Another digit in this overall mathematical equation that I would be failing you if I did not at least put into this chapter as food for thought for your consideration is making mention of the unique spiritual significance of Surah Al-Baqarah, or the cow, Surah 2 as we call it, in the religion and culture of Islam. The Quran in its current form contains only 114 surahs. If you have studied the history of the text of the Quran, then you know that the Quran that the Muslim holds in his hands in 2025 is thinner than the Quran that existed in its original form. Caliph Uthman standardized the Quranic text and had around 25% of it removed for political reasons. And then he burned all the pre-existing manuscripts that he could locate, which contradicted his new version, leaving only 114 surahs left. This edited and redacted Quran is the one that the vast majority of Muslims on the planet are reading from today. Of course, Uthman was not able to burn all of them. Many survived his effort to purge the planet of all versions but his. The existence of pre-Uthman texts that contain somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 surahs on display at various museums throughout the world is a game changer. If only more Muslims knew of the extreme textual critical problems with the origins of the Quran and how many variant manuscripts and readings existed at the beginning, then they would see Islam as it truly is and they would leave it. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the Ulema Council had at least 144 surahs available to them to quote at the opening of their report. Out of all of them, they chose specifically Surah 2. But why? What was it about this particular Quranic chapter that made it the fitting and defining passage to use in such a report? Was it a coincidence, or were they trying to send a deeper, subliminal, and more cerebral message in choosing it? Yes, it is about fakes who pretend to be Muslim but are not. We just went over all that earlier in great detail. But is there even more under the surface? Allow me to present you with a blockbuster that will blow your mind. Sahih al-Muslim, Book 6, Hadith 252, quote, Abu Hurairah reported Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, as saying, "Do not make your houses as graveyards. Satan runs away from the house in which Surah Baqarah is recited," close quote. In Arabic, the word sahih means unimpeachably authentic. In Islamic theology, Al-Bukhari and Al-Muslim are viewed as being equal in inspiration and authority to the Quran itself. Here, the hadith compiler, named Imam Muslim, has an account of the life of Muhammad given to him by a man named Abu Hurairah. According to Hurairah, Muhammad taught that When you do not recite Surah 2, you make your house as a graveyard. It means that the home is frightening and spiritually disturbing. But when you recite it, Satan runs away. There are many reasons to believe that the Ulema Council deliberately quoted Surah 2 at the beginning of their report intentionally. Not just because it deals with phonies, not just because it deals with hypocrites, but also because reciting it casts out Satan. This is a sneaky and backhanded, yet clever and subliminal way of saying that the international view of Farrakhanism by the rest of the Islamic world is that Farrakhanism is satanic. As I get set to end this chapter, let me peel it down to the core for you. You urgently need to understand what I'm saying to you. You need to wrestle with and need to let sink into your mind the fact that a gathering of the finest Islamic scholars on earth has applied this well-known Quranic passage about hypocrites who are on their way to hell to the life and ministry of Louis Farrakhan and to his followers and their theology. It's a passage that you quote at Satan in order to make him and his demons leave your house. If you're in the Nation of Islam, the entire planet of 2.5 billion Muslims on every continent that you've been deceived into believing they see me as their fellow brother or sister, actually sees you as a non-Muslim. They don't see you as a brother. They don't see you as a sister. They see you as a phony. They see you as a fake. They see you as a counterfeit. At best, they see you as deceived and in need of guidance back to a more true expression of Islam. Why? Because you're supposed to be such a faithful and devoted student of the Quran, the Hadith, and Islamic theology that you could never be persuaded to follow a false, imposter, pseudo-Islamic teacher like Farrakhan. You are supposed to hear him talk theology and know instantly that you are in the presence of a Walmart knockoff brand of Islam. Yet in spite of all the information available to you in every mosque on the planet, you still choose to ignore every fact. You still choose to follow the teachings of a man whose work has been critically examined and scrutinized comparatively against the Quran and the Hadith, and it has been found wanting. You're not in something authentically Islamic, and the whole Islamic world outside of the Nation of Islam condemns all that you've been taught to believe. They look at you and see an enemy of Allah. They laugh at you. They feel sorry for you. This needs to concern you. In America, we have tunnel vision. We often get so focused on our own tree right in front of our face to the point that we forget about the larger overall international forest of which we are but one smaller part, you see. If you go outside of America, you will find that there's an entire broad universe of Islamic believers composed of over 2.5 billion people. They exist on every continent. Black people, white people, red people, yellow people, all varieties of people. And the vast majority of Muslims on the earth condemn Farrakhan's American teachings as being in direct contradiction with what Islam actually believes, practices, and stands for. When you become a member of the Nation of Islam, the Fruit of Islam, or any offshoot of the Black Muslim movement in America, you dedicate your entire life to a counterfeit that is not officially recognized by the rest of the global Islamic world. Go back a few pages and freshly reread the original fatwa all over again. Read it the second time in light of the commentary that I've just provided you on it. It will make even more sense to you now that you know what's happening. The Quranic verse about hypocrites, liars, and fake Muslims is literally how it opens. It also is a verse that, according to Islamic tradition, is spoken to cleanse a home of Satan and demons. Right out of the gate, they want you to have that verse in your mind as you continue to read the rest of their report. They're setting the tone from the jump, telegraphing what their ultimate conclusion is about to be. After that damning passage, they state plainly that their goal is to answer the question that Muslims all over the world have asked them to investigate and render a verdict on. Can Mr. Farrakhan and his followers be accepted as Muslim in the sense that this word is defined by the Sharia? Why should they even bother? Well, They say right in there that they have a duty to the Muslim people to check it out. When a person or a group is openly preaching and teaching doctrines that look unusual, the ulema are bound to investigate the matter and to judge whether these doctrines imply heresy or apostasy. They go on to say that the issues in question, this board answers as follows. They go on to discuss the standards by which they would declare someone a Muslim or a non-Muslim. They leave a lot of wiggle room for people who are trying their best to live the Muslim life, but sometimes still mess it up, to still be counted among the brothers and sisters. There's some grace and mercy on some things. Other things are not tolerated. But they're establishing that being fair in their assessment was very important to them. Their Sharia rule regarding unbelief is that unbelief is proved by the principles believed. But how do they determine what somebody believes? The most common way to prove what a man actually believes is by analyzing his speeches and writings. It's written right there. Then they move on to Farrakhan's teaching of Allah, having been incarnated in the person of Master Wallace Farad Muhammad, our Father who art in Detroit. Anybody who does not see the problem contained in this Farrakhanistic teaching does not know anything about the religion of Islam or the Quran. Allah cannot be born into a human body. He only exists in the Islamic heaven. The idea of him being born from a woman and walking the earth in human flesh is a blasphemous concept to every other Muslim on the globe who's not in the Nation of Islam. Wally Dodd Ford, who lived from 1877 to 1934, was a white narcotics dealer who came to America as an immigrant from New Zealand. He did a stretch for narcotics dealing in San Quentin prison around the time of 1926. His mother was a quarter Indian or a quarter Pakistani. So he had dark hair, he had brown eyes, and a slight small hint of melanin of a kind to his skin. Maybe olive at the darkest. But there is one thing that he was not, and that's a black American. If you run into young Jimmy X or Willie 2X or Kyle Shabazz or George Muhammad from the neighborhood, you share with them the fact that Wallace Farad Muhammad was a white drug dealer named Wally Dodd Ford. Their first reaction will be ignorance. They're in a state of shock and disbelief. Why? Because they've never heard these facts before. Patiently educate them, keeping love and the glorification of God as your driving motives and your method. Speaking the truth in love. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15. Their second reaction will be to verbally attack you on a personal level. If you're black, they've been trained to call you an Uncle Tom, a house individual, a coon, a sellout, a Sambo, you've been bamboozled, etc. If you're white, they've been trained to call you a devil, a liar, an oppressor, the descendant of rapists and slave traders, a genocidal person, a colonizer, etc. Do not let the silliness of the name-calling bother or distract you. They do not mean it. It's a conditioned response, like a kid who was raised by a bad parent. It's a learned behavior. They don't know any better. Let it become like the buzzing of flies to you. Be, as the kids call it, unbothered. I know that this is easier said than done. Pray to God and ask Him for a fresh filling of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit will give you a supernatural empowerment to endure it all. Their third reaction will be to say that the man in the Detroit arrest photo and the man in the San Quentin prison mugshot are literally two different guys. But this author has utilized the FBI Freedom of Information Act of 1993 and has witnessed that the fingerprint evidence in both Detroit and California, respectively, are an identical match. Wallace Farad and Wally Dodd Ford are one and the same man. The Detroit Police Department interrogation record gives an account of Farad saying, "It's just a racket," when referring to the work he was doing in founding the Nation of Islam. The word racket is an early 20th century way of referring to the method by which somebody makes money. In the 2020s, if a man said, "It's just a hustle," that's the closest equivalent that I can use to make it make sense in today's vernacular. As Webster defines a racket, quote, a fraudulent scheme, enterprise, or activity, close quote. That is Merriam-Webster's Collegiate Dictionary, 11th edition, page 1024. Fard sat in the Morris Science Temple under the teachings of Timothy Drew Ali, who lived from 1886 to 1929, where he was given the name David Ford L. for a brief season. When Timothy Drew Ali was beaten to death by the Chicago Police Department in 1929, Ford saw the opening and began his Nation of Islam, originally being a branch of the Morris Science Temple. The stock market crash of 1929 conveniently happened around this time, and Fard seized that crisis as an opportunity to preach that this stock market crash and this Great Depression that followed were both judgment against America and that he was supernaturally causing them. His followers believed he had the power to do this and were thus scared into doing all that he said and taught. Allah incarnate? Muslim government leaders have Allah incarnate. Muslim governmental leaders have executed people for teaching stuff like this about themselves. Their disagreement with and hatred of the Christian teaching of Yahweh Elohim being born through Mary and walking the earth in the historical person of Jesus of Nazareth is well documented. If Muslims won't let Jesus be Yahweh Elohim incarnate, they sure as heck won't let Wallace Farad Muhammad be Allah incarnate either. Do Muslims in the Middle East really want to face America and bow down and recite, "There is no God but Wally Dodd Ford"? Get the heck out of my face with that bull crap. To think that they would, could, or should is just too stupid to fathom. In Farrakhan, you are following a man who claims to be a Muslim, but is actually ignorant of his own Quran. And finally, we have Elijah Muhammad being Allah's apostle. The Hadith calls Muhammad the Imam of all the prophets. Sometimes he's called the seal of all the prophets. But both words mean that he was the top dog of all the prophets that came before him. Not only that, but there will be no prophets that will come along after him. To suddenly declare Elijah Poole Muhammad of Chicago by way of Georgia in the 1930s in America as a prophet of Islam is to call Allah, Muhammad, the Quran, and the Hadith liars. Are you willing to call Allah and Muhammad and the Quran liars? Are you willing to call yourself a Muslim in any sense of the word whatsoever by believing this crap? It's impossible. Not only that, but if you say Elijah Muhammad's arrival and preaching in the 1930s through the early 1970s, America was, if this was supposedly from Allah, then you are saying that there was something so lacking and so insufficient in the message of Muhammad as recorded in the Quran that it made Elijah Muhammad's ministry necessary. You're saying that Elijah Muhammad had to come along and complete Allah's finished message. I got to read that again. If you say Elijah Muhammad's arrival and preaching in the 1930s through the early 1970s in America was supposedly from Allah, then you are saying that there was something so lacking and so insufficient in the message of Muhammad as recorded in the Quran that it made Elijah Muhammad's ministry in America necessary. You're saying Elijah Muhammad had to come along and complete Allah's unfinished message in the Quran because the Quran by itself is lacking. Elijah Poole / Muhammad being a prophet of Allah means that his words and works are Islamic scripture. Farrakhan being Elijah's successor means that his words are also Islamic scripture. It's like they're having a membership drive to see how many people they can declare as Allah's apostle. It's insane. But it ultimately means that the Quran and the Hadith were not complete on their own. Taking this cheap shot at Muhammad by saying Elijah had to show up eventually takes you across the line where you're now taking the same cheap shot at the Quran itself. Even if you're not trying to go there, the logic necessarily drives you there. and you have to confront it. If the messenger Muhammad was not enough, then the message he brought, the Quran, was also not enough. You're not going to get 2.5 billion Muslims across the globe to endorse this absurdity. It's not going to happen. Elijah Muhammad himself said he would have no successor. Yet Farrakhan calls himself Elijah Muhammad's successor. You can't make this stuff up. Who's lying? Elijah Muhammad or Louis Farrakhan? You know my answer. They're both liars. The funnies just write themselves with this stuff. Elijah Muhammad, I am the last prophet of Allah. I will have no successor. Louis Farrakhan, I am the successor of Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad, only an Uncle Tom would lead a march on Washington. Louis Farrakhan leads a march on Washington. And these two teachings alone are so anti-Islamic that the Council of Ulema are able to declare case closed immediately following just that quick glance. No deeper dive needed. The fight is over. The opponent is knocked out in round one. The suspect is dead to rights. The evidence is too damning. There is no affirmative defense in existence that can possibly overcome it. They don't even need to examine the mad scientist named Yaqub, nor do they need to examine the end of the world black versus white race war in which UFOs are going to nuke America from outer space. Nor do they need to examine Elijah Muhammad's flirtation with and heavy borrowing from Prince Hall Freemasonry. Nor do they need to examine Elijah and Farrakhan's roles in the assassination of Malcolm X. Nor do they need to examine the historically inaccurate fictional teachings about the lost tribe of Shabazz. None of the little stuff matters because they've screwed up the big stuff so violently. So the theological discussion is over before it can even begin. Look at the council's own words in their fatwa. Once again, quote, "This is enough to say that everyone who belongs to the Nation of Islam is not ipso facto a Muslim but an unbeliever," close quote. Look at the fatwa again, it's right there. The nature of Allah as an indivisible and solid deity, as well as the completeness and all-sufficiency of the prophethood of Muhammad, are so essential and so foundational to Islam that if you're wrong about them, it literally doesn't matter if you're right about anything else, because you're wrong enough already from the very beginning to have defined yourself out of Islam and into the world of unbelievers. Somebody attempting to bring you under his umbrella when he himself does not even have the respect of his peers in the international community of the religion he's trying to sell you and claims to be a minister of, should forever be a serious red flag that demands your immediate attention and action. If you join the Nation of Islam because Farrakhan's speeches opened your eyes to many of the injustices and conspiracies taking place in our time and our country, I can understand and respect that. If you join the Nation of Islam because Elijah Muhammad's writings gave you a sense of identity and self-esteem that you were lacking, I can understand and respect that. If you join the Nation of Islam because you wanted to connect with God and have a deeper spiritual walk in this life via the religion of Islam, then you've joined for the wrong reasons. Because with all due respect, Louis Farrakhan is no more of a Muslim than your dog is. He's cosplaying. He's playing dress-up clown and pretend religion. All of the Muslims on earth outside of America, and most of them inside of America also, know this. And deep down inside of your own conscience, you know it too. The council's final words sum it all up for you. Quote, "Each one of them who keeps silent while listening to Mr. Farrakhan being called a quote-unquote Muslim leader is sinning," close quote. It doesn't get much more plain than that. I'm happy that an International Council of Islamic Clerical Scholarship has talked about this together at the highest level, arrived at a consensus, and rendered a clear, fact-based verdict. I'm disappointed, though, that it happened nearly 30 years ago, yet it's not well known as it ought to be. This ought to be common knowledge. I pray that by including it in this book, this information gets put into somebody's hands that needs to see it, and it makes an impact on somebody's life. And as always, whether you're a Sunni, Shiite, Wahhabi, Sufi, Nation of Islam, Fruit of Islam, Moora Science Temple, Five Percenter, or any of the other ones, I urge you to renounce all of it. I urge you to come to God the Son, second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ. He lived a sinless life, fulfilled the law, bled on a cross, died on behalf of the elect, which is the Christian church, rose again bodily, ascended into heaven, and is seated at the right hand of God the Father. He will come again bodily at the end of this age to judge everybody, living and dead. All that we say, do, think, and feel, which is in contradiction to God's holy nature and in violation of his perfectly just law, constitutes a capital crime that we've committed against him and against the very throne of heaven itself. All of us have built and are building a cosmic rap sheet, a file folder in our personal name, filled with scrolls containing crimson stains, containing red marks. The Bible calls this file charges that were brought against us. Colossians chapter 2, verse 14, and says of those charges that their obligations, or the things that the charges end up making us owe to God, are hostile to us. Each one of those crimes is outrageous in the sight of a holy and just Creator. Each one of them makes him immeasurably angry. We will stand judicially guilty before our Maker one day, deserving of every bit of whatever negative happens to us in the afterlife. The death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the only way to be declared not guilty. Jesus is the lawyer in the heavenly courtroom who can get your charges dropped, as the Bible describes the Christian courtroom experience on the other side of the grave, on the other side of their last breath, like this. Quote, having erased the charges that were brought against us, along with their obligations that were hostile to us. He took those charges away when he nailed them to the cross. Close quote. That's Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. Not only that, but Jesus is the Savior who can add beauty and meaning to your life on this side of the grave as well. Peace and joy on a level that you never knew was possible. But he's the only way. No pillars, no fasts, no rituals, no pilgrimage, no jihads, no sacraments. Nothing that you can do will make God look at you with any grace or any mercy. It's only what Jesus has done on your behalf, or on behalf of those who believe in him, I should say. Being rescued from eternal conscious torment is a gift of immeasurable love. To God, it came at infinite and horrifying cost. To you, it comes for free. I urge you to receive it today. I urge you to come to Jesus. Leave the mosque and come to the church. Drop the crescent and pick up the cross. Get rid of Prophet Isa, peace be upon him, and acquire God the Son, second person of the Trinity, the resurrected and glorified Messiah, Jesus, who is the Christ, instead. Thank you for considering my words on this issue, the most important matter of all matters. I apologize if the language seemed harsh at any point. No personal insult was intended, but the sense of urgency was high as I'm fighting for your life. God bless you. Reverend Brian James Shanley, Doctor of Divinity, Minneapolis, Minnesota, United States of America, 2025.